Breaking royal shock. Prince Harry has reportedly broken down in tears after a palace insider confirmed the truth about his biological parentage. For decades, rumors swirled, but now, shocking DNA revelations may have exposed a secret that could change the very foundation of the monarchy. Stay with us as we uncover the full story behind this emotional and explosive revelation. To suddenly question everything you've known about the world, everything you've loved since birth, and the very name you've responded to all of your life. Imagine being born into one of the world's most famous families, where your every move is monitored, parsed, and thrust into the hard light of world attention. Now imagine learning that possibly the key to who you really are, who your father actually is, has been hiding behind palace walls all along. This is not the stuff of fiction or political thrillers, but of Prince Harry's life story. Now the Duke of Sussex finds himself at the center of one of the most explosive revelations the British monarchy has faced in a century. Whispers have followed him everywhere like a shadow since way back. But according to an insider at the palace, shocking DNA has allegedly confirmed long-circulated gossip in multiple tabloids and in the media. There are claims that James Hewitt, Lady Di's one-time beau, is the father. The emotional weight of this statement is also reported to have left Harry in tears. That way, we can read into the origins of this story by rewinding and looking at the history of the royal family and the scandalous whispers that have haunted Harry since he could understand the tabloids. Side-by-side images of James Hewitt and young Harry have appeared side-by-side in gossip mags for the better part of 3 decades, and for good reason. They both have exceedingly red hair, similar smiles, and northerly mannerisms that visually make Harry look different from Prince Charles. These whispers of royal scandal helped attract the public's interest in Harry. It was the steady drip-drip of such reminders that served only to fuel the uncertainty that existed about Harry's legitimacy, as the tabloids traded unfounded conjecture while palace officials clung to their familiar mantra of silence. This silence was to speculation as oxygen is to a flame, and the result was one of the greatest royal conspiracy theories in history. At the heart of this is the poignant figure of the much-loved Princess of Wales, who had married Prince Charles and become trapped in a marriage of unhappiness, infidelity, and loneliness. Her relationship with James Hewitt, a former riding instructor, flourished at a time when she felt unloved and isolated in her marriage. Many reports allude that Diana and Hewitt were not only emotionally intimate but also physically involved. Diana later revealed she had found comfort and support with Hewitt after her marriage had gone wrong. Within this context, the rumors regarding Harry's parentage began to swirl, with critics and royal watchers noting the troubling proximity in terms of timeline between Diana's affair with Hewitt and Harry's birth. That didn't stop press reports, official records, and textbooks wading in over the years, all of which continued to speak of the row occurring after Harry was borne home, despite still having niggling doubts. I imagine Harry's childhood under this cloud would have been incredibly traumatic. Every crazy, malicious tabloid headline about his parentage was not merely idle chatter, it was a direct attack on his status as a royal, as a son, and as a future leader of the royal family. How would it feel to be a child and hear slights or smirks from schoolmates, reporters, strangers suggesting that your biological father was someone other than the person you called you dad? Imagine the effect on a boy who was already forced to cope with losing his mother as a small child, in front of the entire world. But Harry just found them humorous, the gossiping of other people. They were unhealed wounds that never did heal. He had grown up, an outcast with despair in his heart. Forever unfavorably contrasted to his elder brother William, Harry was to be troubled by a sense of persistent alienation, especially when rumors about James Hewitt would rear their head in periods of personal crisis or when he himself made mistakes on the public stage. Nevertheless, Harry soldiered on. He joined the army, made it on his own, and tried to carry on his mother's work. But the baseless rumors followed him into adulthood, particularly as his relationship with Meghan Markle flourished. Rumors were used by media as a weapon during it, with that of Hewitt being exploited, shaking Harry's legitimacy as a member of the royal family, as if he were less of a royal, lesser, or simply fraudulent. The rumor wasn't just about hair color or facial structures. It sought to diminish Harry's status as a Windsor, depicting him as a wannabe in his own family. And the ironic twist is that Harry's own mother had once regarded him as her protector, her beacon in dark times. The idea that his identity could now be weaponized against him is heartbreaking and infuriating. A generation later, the story has grown from whispers into something that some believe is irrefutable evidence. DNA tests reportedly conducted on the TLY confirmed what most believed all along, that Harry is not the biological son of King Charles but the illegitimate offspring of James Hewitt. If this reveal is true, it's huge. It not only fractures Harry's identity, but also shakes the monarchy to its foundations, calling into question what constitutes authority, inheritance, and the credibility of one of the world's oldest institutions. In the case of Harry, the corroborative result is not a vindication over both rumor and hearsay, it is a shattering of the heart. In a life spent fighting against public narratives and taking enormous pride in his ancestry, having this possibility confirmed to him so late would feel like perhaps the most profound betrayal, not just by the palace, but by history. The revelation comes at a time when Harry is already estranged from his family. Beleaguered by a maelstrom of fights, interviews, memoirs, and accusations that have estranged him from the royal family, he has long been seen as a liability by the palace. His independence and candor were not a danger to be taken lightly, they rocked the structured mask of unity that leaders had worked so hard to keep propped in place. If the DNA is a revelation, one's got to wonder why it was only revealed now. Was it a deliberate leak designed to further besmirch his name? Or maybe it was the desperate act of a guilty insider weighed down by the knowledge of secrets. With Harry's lifelong struggle of finding his own identity, his role in the family, and needing to come to terms with the truth, he may have berated in tears from sheer disbelief, anger, or the deep sadness that comes from years of deception. This is not only a chapter of betrayal, but it is also a journey for uncovering the truth. To find out that his father is not what he thought must feel to him like having lost the parent with whom he had the most in common, the one who earnestly wished he could just move on and be a man for once, but instead lost his only other parent thus far, Diana himself. This truth sends him so much deeper into pain, ripping at old gashes and inflicting fresh cuts. He reportedly leaned heavily on Meghan during this strife and privately broke down as the reality of his decision sunk in. Now Meghan, who has styled herself as Harry's shield against media and royal demands, has a very real crisis on her hands to resolve. Although Meghan is standing by Harry, the simple reality is the extent of this revelation could change Harry's relationships with his brother, the monarchy, and the British public. On the other hand, in the midst of the chaos stands a trace of self-search. What is fatherhood, really? If the genetics don't match, does it erase all the years of nurturing, disciplining, guiding, and loving the child? King Charles, though flawed, was the one who raised Harry, gave him his royal title, and was the financial provider. Would DNA modifications overwrite decades of perspired therapy sessions? Or will it only reveal another sad chapter in the Harry Windsor family saga? These questions cut to the core of his identity crisis, an existential struggle that he will have to resolve as he makes his way beyond his royal home. As we press deeper into all this, we realize that this is not just a story of you proving or disproving a rumor, but also the weight and torment of decades that have brought this question to this moment. We make scandals, for much of the public, to be just a good show or treat, forgetting that everyone in the headlines exchanges, has to try and live with it. For Harry, the family lineage that rooted him also carries weight, if the insider's claims and the DNA evidence prove true. He has not only a personal weight on his shoulders, but a political, historical weight on his shoulders. The basis of monarchy is blood ties and legitimacy. Its legitimacy is predicated on the belief that succession is direct and clear. If Harry's fatherhood does belong to James Hewitt, the world will have to wrestle with some very awkward questions. Was Diana trying to change the crown's history? Was Harry ever in line for the succession? And if so, why did it take so long for this truth to be hidden? To really appreciate the severity of this, we must sympathize with a boy who was raised in an emotionally arid home in one of the coldest locales. The court is no place for personal truths, it is an arena where appearances matter more than truth. From the time he could walk, Harry was taught to wave, smile, and play his role in front of the cameras. But I'm sure beyond the smiles, he must have felt the hurt of every insinuation, all the cruel comments made about him, questions about very reason for birth. Classmates would mock him. Reporters would find it amusing, and casual observers would chuckle over the resemblance they said he bore to Hewitt. No child should have had to bear that burden, but bear it Harry did every day whilst mourning the one person who would have fiercely guarded him from it, his mother Diana. The loss of Diana, at such an impressionable age of 12, was a trauma that shaped Harry's life. It left him vulnerable, unmoored, and hungry for connection. How much must he feel attacked to find out now that the same woman who loved him more than anything could have abandoned him with a load so heavy, so hard to bear, that he could be destroyed? They are questions that the public may never see answered, but to Harry, answering them could make the difference between peace of mind or despair. They are not his tears alone, but the tears for a mother who could be lost, for a father he perhaps never really understood, for a family that stood in deceit to preserve the veneer of respectability. The heart of this introduction moves the audience headlong into the emotional whirlwind of Harry as he falls apart. He was allegedly in such a state of shock when he heard the news that he broke down and cried. Once he had suffered the agony of losing his mother, been poked and prodded by the media and stifled under the demands of royal life, he was finally thrown into a painful truth he feared all along, that he was never a real Windsor. For years, he had defended himself against the claims, insisting Charles was his father, and braving the ginger jokes and media mockery. To have that denial smashed by science would have been enough for a spirit to break. His tears aren't weakness, but the crumbling of a man who carried too much for too long. Making this revelation even more poignant is the timing of it all. Harry, for years now, has been trying to stake out a life beyond the royal family, moving to America, establishing a brand alongside Meghan, pulling away. But as he was on the verge of accepting who he was, the past comes back with a vengeance. The alleged DNA evidence isn't just hanging over him, it recasts everything he has built. How does one stride forward when the very name that defined his legacy fractures beneath him? How does one look a brother or father or even a grandmother in the eye when they stayed silent, and the silence may have hidden the truth? The story of Prince Harry's disputed paternity didn't begin today. It dates back to the very first whispers that led to one of the longest-running royal conspiracy theories in history. Harry had barely become recognizable in photographs before the comparisons started. Sensationalist tabloids that were always hungry for a scandalized headline, fixated on one aspect more than anything else, the coif of red hair. For them, though, his hair color provided a conspicuous symbol, a visual signifier that there might be something different about him compared with his father, Prince Charles, as well as his brother William. Beauty, in the hard light of public scrutiny, became evidence, and an image became an indictment. In the early 1990s, pictures of James Hewitt, Princess Diana's former riding instructor, circulated while images of Harry were also in the public eye. To some, they were striking. They both had bright red hair, a wide smile, and the same kind of expression that seemed almost too familiar to walk away from. The media took hold of this, ransacking the stories implying that Diana's affair with Hewitt dated back further than the public had realized. Even thought Diana and Hewitt insist that the affair began some time after Harry's birth, the media never did. They spread stories casting Harry as little more than physical evidence of Diana's infidelity. These pieces fed sales and titillated the public imagination, but with an unacknowledged cruelty. They made a small boy into a scandalous enigma. The whispers spread over the lack of head-on collision. For the royal family, the strategy of keeping quiet, refusing to get involved in gossip, had long served it well in difficult periods. But lack of speech didn't save her this time. Instead, it became destructive. And every time the palace ignored the rumors, it just inflamed the public's gossip. Many started to take the refusal to deny the claims as a confirmation. So, throughout the 1990s and then into the 2000s, Harry's very being became a sort of public entertainment, a cruel and living joke among some people. A scandal hovering in the wings whenever the press required a handy diversion or eye-catching story about Harry himself. This gossip was more than talk, it was a ghost, hovering over him during his school years, his time in the military, and into his days of trying to make a name for himself. The press often described him as the spare, a go-to identifier for anyone who isn't the firstborn, that long-suffering sidekick to William. The ongoing whispers about Hewitt only furthered his feelings of isolation. It was almost like the universe was trying to tell him he didn't really belong, that he should be counting himself lucky every day for being a little shit of a prince. The mockery from other kids at school, the gossip in neighborhood circles and the cutting wit of the journalists had all chipped away at his self-esteem. And it wasn't just the public who fanned the flames. The media, who are driven by competitiveness and outshining their counterparts, were forever running around seeking new angles on the story. Photographers hunted for any unguarded pictures showing the supposed uncanny resemblance of Harry to his father James Hewitt. Writers blew every comment Hewitt had said about Diana, and were able to twist them into claims they were paternity claims in despite of Hewitt himself denying paternity over Harry. The refusals were couched as though he were hiding the truth. The media thrived in ambiguity rather than clarity, and the royal family's silence had plenty of room for speculation. The ongoing rumor mill began to take on a life of its own, and became a cultural phenomenon in itself, forming one of the most enduring myths in recent royal history. It was a subject of hushed conversations over dinner, heated arguments in pubs, dissected in documentaries, and was carried forward in the digital age on blogs and on social media. The rumor-mongering about Harry's actual father never ended, rising above the merely familial and touching on matters of class, scandal, treachery, and the monarchy's awkward permeability. Wow, Harry must have been under something that he can't describe it. Every speech and headline was a stinging jab in your face, a reminder of how much the world was suspicious of you. It wasn't just a question of what he had said or done, it was what he was. He suffered the taunts of nasty people who twisted his features to see hints of Hewitt, and despite his very best endeavors to do right, whether serving in the army, founding the Invictus Games or starting a new life with Meghan, his detractors continued to mutter, a persistent rusted-on refrain that could always be dredged up and lay simmering, ready to boil over into the public domain at any time. The life of these rumors already shows us what society's interaction with the monarchy is really about. On one level, people idolize royalty, but, on the other, there is an impulse or a desire to take royalty apart, to pull at the threads and see where they go, to reveal the humanity, as well as the flaws and the secrets. In this atmosphere Harry was the natural butt of this evil interest. He was cherished yet questioned. Honest man distrusted, but bastard. Such murmurs provided the people a means to voice their frustration with the monarchy by hinting that even in an institution as rigidly managed as the establishment, one scandal after another blossomed and thrived. And Harry had never expressed any public doubt. He ever manifested his grace, declaring himself to be proud of being a son to Charles. Outwardly, he didn't allow rumors to form his identity, but in his heart of hearts, they must have gnawed at him. His resilience in the face of such mean speculation speaks volumes about his resilience and also underscores the deep emotional cost of having been born into a household whose truth is negotiable and whose appearances are paramount. The reason why this story endures is because Diana occupies a unique place in the public's hearts. She was a princess who let you see her sweat, whose problems could still be seen on the palace grounds. The release of photos showing of her leaving a gym with James Hewitt only fueled the press's assumptions, turning the prince's paternity into a competition. That Diana herself confessed to feelings towards Hewitt only stoked the tabloids' muckraking, adding a personal feel to the scandal. This narrative provided a fusion of fellow feeling for Diana's suffering and outrage at her betrayal of Charles. Most importantly, it was a welcome mat for speculation about Harry. But whatever Diana told her rocked because rumors had a louder voice. Diana constantly reminded me that Harry was conceived before her relationship with Hewitt was a physical one. The press, starved for a storyline, paid no attention to facts and went for drama and sensationalism. Context-free images were paired with great newsbait language, startling aghast provocateurs, and the audience was served. The 33-year age difference between Harry's age and Hewitt's certainly helped feed the rumor mill. When the seed was planted, it never got entirely uprooted even when Diana died. This racist conspiracy unfairly haunted Harry, whose mother had died in a very public tragedy. This hypercritical gaze must have been suffocating for a young boy trying to find himself. With his paternity called into question, he found himself under a huge deal of pressure that can sever how one sees oneself and leave scars that are invisible to the naked eye, but deeply painful, especially in his formative teenage years. Harry's behavior, frequently condemned in the press, takes on a new light through this lens. Was he motivated by a cavalier arrogance or a lifelong feeling of not belonging? A good talking to the issue of rumors only served to widen the gulf in public opinion between Harry and the members of the royal family. And as William was invariably portrayed as the reliable and dutiful heir, Harry was cast as the unpredictable wild card, the outsider who never quite seemed to make the grade. The never-ending rumors involving Hewitt only served to escalate this story, turning Harry into a figure of wonder and mockery in equal measure for the media. He was shrouded in mystery to the punters and viewers, serving as a brutal barometer that even inside the royal family, betrayal and scandal were still rife. It is very important to know that the media thrives on stories like this. Royal scandals don't just happen, they are carefully crafted, nurtured and maintained by editors who know that scandal sells. In Harry's case, the Hewitt story developed into an ongoing storyline, a thread in which the press could tug in order to fill the pages and stir up controversy. With every public appearance and wrong move by Harry, the rumor was back, resounding again through the ears of the public. It formed an unacknowledged background to his life, a secret shadow that traveled with him into maturity even when Hewitt publicly denied fathering Harry. My words were distorted by the press, which just made me more and more scrutinized and distrusted. His non-denials were worded in a way that included truth but obfuscation as well. His reticence to discuss the specifics of Diana's life struck many as suspicious. It was drama, not resolution, that the public and the royal bloodhounds of the media, hunting ever desperately for the next royal scandal, sought, and that appetite continues. It was precisely because the denials never ceased that to the constant rumor they grew increasingly attractive. If Hewitt was not Harry's dad, why not just ignore the rumor? Although Diana's timeline would contradict that, the palace's position was to stay resolutely silent. Every question left open gave birth to a new wave of speculation. The palace's passive, or outright neutral, position was consistent with the monarchy's tradition of giving nothing, make that a big fat zero, away amid controversy. In assuming that by ignoring hearsay, the stories would fade, the palace actually armed the rumors against Harry. The lack of a definitive, emphatic refusal gave the public license to believe whichever story it preferred. In fact, the silence became itself an instrument to fuel the rumors, instead of quenching them. So the whisper lived not merely for years but for decades. As it spread through the decades, one long line of readers followed tabloid next to tabloid next to TV next to the robust online land populated with forums and social media. It persisted, and its never-let-up quality helped the matter look all the more true. 3 decades of rumors, after all, was quite a legacy, and one, frankly, that seemed to suggest the story had legs if it managed to remain part of the popular discourse for so long. That is the merciless wheel of scandal. The more it lasts, the more plausible it seems. Caught up in this maelstrom, he was helpless to check its course. Every time he sought to define his own image, that constant doubt of the unanswered always took priority. Was he Charles's son at all, or was his whole life based on a lie? And as the public demanded a resolution, the palace stayed mum. The deeper into this first chapter we got, the more significant this rumor became. It was more than just gossip or intrigue, it shaped a storyline that affected how Harry was seen by the world, how the media portrayed him, and conceivably how he saw himself. This story ate away at his confidence, destroyed his sense of safety, and left him vulnerable to suffering that is now so apparent in stories of his tears. It was not so much a case of hair color, or even of physical similarities, as it was a constant state of heir-hauntedness, heir to the question of legitimacy, authority, precedence, succession, monarch as miracle, and monarchy in an age of disillusion. They asked questions that went way beyond a person's identity, deep into the heart of an institution built on bloodlines and inheritance. Within the alleged confirmation of a palace insider, whispers from the past have emerged in a deafening clamor, sending shockwaves through the royal family and prompting the world to do a double-take. Harry was never really a Windsor. What would this mean for the crown itself? As we entered the late 2000s and Harry began his military service, this early whisper became a cultural fixture. It was more than standard tabloid fodder, generating documentaries, late-night comedy riffs, and even serious discussion about the authenticity of the royal bloodline. The world is hereafter divided into people that are obsessed with the British monarchy, and people that are not. One side is the face of worship, magnetism, and loyalty, the other that of doubt, derision, and the love of argument. It was a delicate balance that Harry had to maintain when he was on active duty in Afghanistan. Although he remained dedicated to his fellow veterans and cherished his true public persona, the rumors kept swirling, forever casting a shadow over his service as a soldier and good man. To others, he represented scandal more than service. It begs the question of why the rumor lingered for so long. Humans are naturally drawn to stories that set out to undercut the prevailing narrative even when they've been repeatedly debunked. The idea of a hidden prince as an outcast child was too delicious to ignore. It was a rare glimpse behind the curtain of one of the world's most secretive institutions. In the case of Harry, the story meshed with the narrative. There was a longing to believe the narrative that Diana, trapped in an unhappy marriage, had found true love with Hewitt, and that Harry was the physical manifestation of that secret passion. The situation was romantic to some, scandalous to others, and irresistible to everyone. This story also acted as a way for the media and the public to reconcile the disparity between Harry and William. And William, composed and serious, as the heir, mirrored his father's expression and duties. Harry, on the other hand, was intense and animated, and he seemed malformed. The Hewitt rumor neatly explained the polarity. It allowed pundits to read in, unsubstantiated, that Harry didn't quite belong in the same way as his older brother. Each time Harry failed, either through youthful foolhardiness or questionable choices, so the speculation burned, insinuating by its interest that he didn't really fit in. Yet what the public could enjoy as a bit of fun also cut deep into Harry himself. When you constantly undergo disbelief, it creates a split in you, a continuing sense of instability. For Harry, the break was magnified by grief and endless comparisons to his brother. He had paid his dues not only in William's shadow but in doubts as well. It was as if whatever he achieved, whatever he contributed, he would always be haunted by an overspill question he'd never be able to silence. Even inside the palace, the rumor surely persisted. Courtier staff and insiders could have picked up the murmurs, and then discreet particles could have traveled with some of them as they spread rumors in whispers. Some may have even believed those whispers. Perhaps the cruelest part to consider is that it's not just the public that may have doubts, but even those closest to the monarchy. The sense of loneliness had to be crushing. As solid as William's position was, as uncertain, fragile, fundamentally wobbly. Indeed, as Harry seemed, the monarchy elevates bloodline above all else, and that elevates, too, the possibility of feeling, if not being, found wanting. The rumor did not fade with the passing of time. Instead, it grew as Harry grew into adulthood and married Meghan Markle. The media, hungry for the story of the couple as outsiders, drew on that ages-old story to paint Harry as less legitimate, less royal, less connected to the institution he was stepping away from. So they buttressed the cruel message that had haunted him since he was a child, that he was disposable, not really woven into the fabric. This narrative was given a particularly sharp point when Harry and Meghan publicly feuded with the royal family. The Hewitt gossip came up again as a weapon to question Harry's legitimacy to royal privileges. And this perennial mistrust exposes the inherent frailty of the institution of monarchy. A caste system is hard to maintain if all it is based on is lineage. For William, legitimacy is not in question. For Harry, it has been controversial from the start. And now, with the purported DNA revelation, that feud has come to a head. The murmurings about red hair and photo comparisons have snowballed into an existential doubt for a man who has never known a life without scrutiny. In order to understand how the scandal regarding Prince Harry's parentage brewed into one of the most enduring controversies in the history of the British monarchy, we have to explore the complex relationship between Diana, Princess of Wales, and James Hewitt. Hewitt was only her confidant, her bunk-up and her lover in sensation pages. Their affair had been a tightly kept secret and had thrived at a time when Diana was at her most vulnerable in a marriage that had broken apart. The public loved her as a fairy tale princess, but in private she was struggling with the stifling life of the palace, and the need for real love and affection. Hewitt burst into her life at a crucial time, starting out as a riding instructor and going on to become a figure in one of the most lurid affairs in recent royal history. James Hewitt was planted in the mid-80s as a dashing cavalry officer responsible for teaching Diana to ride. Relatively harmless on its face, the meetings allowed Diana some relief from the oppressive atmosphere of palace life as her estrangement with Prince Charles deepened. Hewitt showed her kindness and attention, and she found in him an understanding ear for her problems, in contrast to her husband's apparent apathy. In the comfort of stables and country hacks, Diana found a part of her spirit again, free from the clutches of duty. Their closeness couldn't stay secret for long to those who were aware of their tight inner circle. Hewitt gave Diana the love she needed, the love she desired, not just help and companionship, but one that was truly tender. His companionship made up for the lack of loyalty, tenderness and emotional intimacy that, she had no qualms in saying, Charles hadn't given her. Thornley's relationship bloomed while Diana was enduring the spectacle of her marriage falling apart, particularly Charles's affair with Camilla Parker Bowles, and struggling to suppress the pain behind her doting mommy and obedient wife demeanor. Hewitt filled her emotional void and the pair turned to each other for intimate conversations, correspondence and occasional secret time together, even to the extent of dodging security to get him into Kensington Palace, a bold move for a royal. These weren't just the actions of a reckless Diana, but of a grasping Diana aching for the connection denied in her marriage. Word of the relationship naturally leaked outside private circles, attracting the gaze of scandal-hungry tabloids. Gossip turned suspect soundbites gradually became more audacious when Diana herself confirmed particular elements of the liaison. The explosive news of a princess betrayed, particularly with a military man who bore an uncanny resemblance to her youngest son, has led to persistent speculation. The controversial chapter was the timeline of the affair. Formally, the affair between Diana and Hewitt commenced in 1986, shortly after Harry was born in 1984. But critics have long cast aspersions on this timeline, wondering whether it was engineered to downplay the damage. The discussion of Harry's paternity during Diana's affair with Hewitt arises with this glow of non-fulfillment, a scandal too fragile for the monarchy even to name. Public disbelief has not been appeased by Hewitt's constant protestations that the affair only began after Harry's birth. Hewitt's uncanny resemblance to pictures of Harry has kept speculation alive and rumbling along among journalists who are not allowed to mention it and the public. It was as thought Hewitt's words were stoking the fire, not putting them to rest. Who would believe a man with so much scandal on him? Because for Diana, this relationship wasn't just based on sex. Friends described her as passionately infatuated to the point of obsession. She supposedly bombarded him with letters, some of which would later be leaked to the public in controversial ways. In these letters, she lamented about the drudgery of life in the palace, and her gratitude for his company. Hewitt was more than just something on the side for her, he was a shoulder to lean on when she felt abandoned. The level of her feelings for him also meant the question of whether she was hiding anything else still lingered. Could she have been hiding even more than just her love? Their forbidden love enthralled the public because it wasn't just a princess having an affair, it was a princess defying the constraints of royal duty and taking comfort in the arms of a man who wasn't part of the royal orbit. The stark social difference between Diana and Hewitt made it even more intriguing. Back in the day, or at least historically, royals married royalty to maintain the illusion of being better than everyone else and having the gods on their side. For Diana to go off with other people outside, that was a kind of quiet rebellion, in a way. When their whirlwind romance eventually came crashing down, Diana was heartbroken. It is also understood that Hewitt remained aloof, especially after increasing media attention. Diana subsequently admitted that when the bond was broken, it shattered her. The man who she believed she could rely on for stability had deserted her, and she was alone once more. I can see she was emotionally scarred by that loss, which, as you said, showed he just how much he was able to draw from her. The end of the affair didn't quell the scandal, it escalated it, much like Hewitt's. Their relationship was sealed in the shared imagination in later interviews and in Diana's letters. For the monarchy, it was a disaster that Diana's affair had been exposed. It wiped out the lovingly primed facade of a perfect royal marriage. Charles's affair with Camilla had already inflicted significant damage, but Diana's confirmation of her own infidelity struck at the heart of the institution. The monarchy depends on illusion, on the veneer of stability and tradition. The heir's wife publicly declaring her love for another man had been a crushing blow that could not be soothed away. That admission begged the unasked question, did Diana really love Hewitt, and could Harry really be Charles's child? And as their romance blossomed, so also did the danger. As Princess of Wales, Diana came under intense scrutiny at every stage of her marriage to the heir to the throne and as the mother of the future king. Despite such scrutiny, she gambled all by devoting her heart to Hewitt, in a search for love she so desperately longed for. Whilst Charles saw her as a royal duty, I am a real person with real needs, and he treated me as such. Their tryst was no secret, but courtiers were clearly aware of the warmth of their intimacy and the risks they were taking. Diana even went to the trouble of placing their meetings in the hands of reliable go-betweens, not only to demonstrate the extent of her longing but also to protect their relationship. The royal family's circle of confidentiality is a delicate thing, and as soon as the press got wind of their intimacy, containing the rumors became a mission impossible. The news was a devastating blow to the monarchy as word spread of the affair. Despite the preservation of a facade of the stability of Charles and Diana's marriage, which the royals, and their associates on the inside at least, remained conscious was a farce. The increasing public awareness of Charles's affair with Camilla only compounded the confusion as Diana's own relationship with Hewitt muddied the waters for the public. It was such a shocking breach of the norms in the palace, seeing it in print like that made clear how much the marriage was past the point of no return. For Diana, her relationship with Hewitt was more than just puppy love, for she gave her heart, soul, and body to him. To those who best knew of her, it was as though he were her husband. Later letters revealed how strong her emotions can be, confessions of dependence on him and fears of losing him emphasizing just how emotional she is. This was not the words of someone infatuated with a fling, but of one convinced that she had found true love in the wreckage of her marriage. This fiery affair kept the rumor mill alive and well on Harry's paternity, especially considering Diana's willingness to throw everything away for Hewitt and a few appearances where some observed a close resemblance between the pair of them. Although she corrected it to clarify her relationship with Hewitt began following Harry's birth, her outpouring of love for Hewitt did nothing to help the situation, and the persistent myth still survives. It was so difficult to correlate them for ordinary people with their doubts that the gossip ran from mouth to mouth with redoubled vigor. On the other hand, Hewitt was in a complicated situation when it comes to their dating life. Though he desired Diana, he was unprepared for the focus that came with her love. At first, trying to maintain privacy, but ultimately the burgeoning media attention and Diana's own passionate nature proved too much. Despite ending their affair, he was surrounded by media pressure to tell the world of their story and eventually had no choice. And his decision to make public the details of their relationship and Diana's letters was seen by many as a betrayal. Some came to his defense, money problems, others found it icky. The publication of these letters didn't just sully Diana's name, but secured Hewitt's place as a perennial thorn in the monarchy's side. What Hewitt did wounded Diana to the depths of her soul. She gave him her trust, love, shared with him her vulnerability, and he repaid her with intimate moments with him, displayed for public consumption, yet again turning some of her worst traumas into public entertainment. As she grieved the void of connection between them, the public gobbled up the distance between them as fuel for the fire of ongoing speculation. If Hewitt was prepared to broadcast Diana's letters, some asked, then what else might he be hiding? His silence and carefully worded statements only heightened suspicions about the illicit romance, which would cast a long shadow over Diana's life in private and change public attitudes about the monarchy. The once adoring fairy tale image of Charles and Diana that lifted the popularity of the crown was shattered beyond repair. Instead, the royal marriage became a blueprint for hypocrisy and discord. As it was, the public was doubtful of Charles's dedication to Camilla, and perhaps at this point both Charles and Camilla were being perceived as trapped in betrayal. The formerly revered Windsor family, the very image of solidity, was revealed to be fissured and deeply human. This controversy dogged Diana even in death, one of the enduring names to her name that cannot be spoken when discussing her work, her life, her troubles. At the heart of it all was the part still unanswered: was she so fond of Hewitt she was carrying his child? Even when she denied it, and official timelines came to blows with the suggestion, it was enough to keep the public's imaginations guessing. The more Diana denied it, the less prepared were people to discount the notion. The 1990s was a time when Diana became the most photographed woman in the world. Every move was recorded, every look studied, every utterance interpreted with operatic gusto. As her official union with Prince Charles failed, the details of her affair with Hewitt were seized upon by the media and became the fodder of books, interviews, and exposes. Bringing the once hidden romance into the open, the story went from a secret to worldwide renown. Astounding depths of misery were exposed within her marriage by Andrew Morton's 1992 biography, Diana, Her True Story. While not directly documenting the Hewitt affair, it set the stage for the revelations that began following Diana's infamous Panorama interview in 1995, which eventually sealed the fate of the royal marriage. In that much-publicized interview, she explicitly said that she had a relationship with Hewitt, confirming the rumor mill of the tabloids. "Yes, I adored him," she confessed. "Yes, I was in love with him, but I was absolutely disappointed," sent shockwaves around the world. It was unheard of a sitting princess admitting to being unfaithful to her husband on national television. This monarchy had relied on secrecy, discretion, and silence. Their Diana shattered that mold with one sentence. The catastrophic results followed close upon each other. Diana's confession was a public humiliation for Charles, who had to admit that the reason his relationship with Diana had cooled was not, as she had accused, solely because of his relationship with Camilla, but because his wife had also sought comfort elsewhere. This fact was a crisis of credibility for the monarchy. How were they to maintain the appearance of being paragons of family values and tradition when the main marriage in their story had been so publicly destroyed? Diana's revelation, however, further intrigued the general public. Despite being a royal, she was portrayed as an imperfect, human, and relatable character. Her affair with a mechanic made her more of every woman but also spelled scandal. Rumors about Harry and Hewitt proliferated. The logic was crude and cruel. If Diana professed love for Hewitt, then could Harry be his? Rumors swirled, and Harry's very nature came under scrutiny. Every scrap of information on his likeness to either Charles or Hewitt was endlessly dissected. Diana's disclosures of her misery raised further questions over whether I was born from true love with another man rather than out of duty to her husband, though she claimed she had not started the affair until after Harry's birth. Her words were drowned in the continued surge of public imagination. The consequences for Hewitt himself were no less ruinous. His affair with Diana made him infamous, but after she abandoned him, he became a pariah. Broke and emotionally troubled in all but a few corners, his choice to collaborate with writers and journalists to tell his side of the story only made his reputation worse. The publication of the intimate, vulnerable letters of Diana was seen as a betrayal by those who had previously sympathized with him. The public's love of Hewitt was brief and became distrust. Some people saw him as a man who had exploited Diana's feelings for personal gain. Others wondered if his refusal to resolve doubts about Prince Harry's paternity hid more profound secrets. Each of his words was closely scrutinized as to their significance. Are all social exchanges presumed to be evidence in waiting? Still, Hewitt's constant protestations of not being Harry's dad didn't stop the scandal. Paradoxically, it did nothing but fan the flames of speculation, because, of course, the public loves the contradiction. Hewitt's vigorous denials and the silence from the palace created a vacuum of information. Into the void stepped the wildest rumors. Soon explanations sprouted in pubs, newspapers, and whispers, evolving into accepted truth for some, while being quite devoid of all actual truth. But once people decide they see the evidence in certain face, no number of denials will change their minds. The impact on Diana was severe, though she tried to rehabilitate her image by undertaking humanitarian work. Her private life went under non-stop cognitive dissonance. Hewitt had become part of her legacy, and whether she embraced it or not, people now viewed her in a certain way. Even when she was far removed from the royal family in her old age, only Harry's parentage, whom the boy was speaking to on the phone when they came, the obvious influence of his father's looks made the difference. She was admired for her compassion and her power to change lives the world over, but she was constantly attacked, like Paula Deen was, over a scandal that stained her image. It would be a scandal that would last far beyond her and one that would haunt her sons, especially Harry, who was still young. The ripple effects through these public confessions were lasting. Imagine being a kid and growing up with the knowledge that your mother had declared her love for another man on television, and that the world was using that pronouncement to call into question your very embodiment. Harry had been exposed to the recurrent insinuations at least since he was old enough to understand dirty talk, getting worse as he got older. They came to life as cruel jokes screamed at passers-by in throngs or emblazoned on the front page of a tabloid. Being raised under this all-encompassing cloud of always being not quite right, suffer all the whispering and gossip, if only she raised them more correctly. As the years passed, whispers took on a more ominous note, following Diana to her untimely death in 1997. She wasn't there to protect her son, to clear his name or to prove unfounded speculations wrong. Her silence in death offered fertile ground for conspiracies to blossom. Every misstep that Harry made, whether foolish behavior of a young man, troubled relations with the media, or decisions to step back from royal duties, prompted the Hewitt narrative to be dragged out of cold storage. Even years after the affair had cooled, its ghost lived on, defining how the world saw him. The illicit affair between Diana and Hewitt, a forbidden love from the past, formed a cornerstone of one of the most malicious myths in royal annals. Not only did it signal the end of a marriage, it also illuminated how vulnerable the monarchy was to scandal. It exposed how delicate the facade of the royal family's public image was, how readily rumor, innuendo and suggestion could steer public opinion. That left Harry in an impossible position, a man who would find autonomy, but was condemned to a relationship he could never grasp as a child. Where a normal child, or royal, might have been able to grow up off stage, every last little bit of Harry's existence, every smile, every grimace, every developmental milestone, would be plotted, documented, caught on film, and analyzed in his case in both the public record and on the comic pages. The monarchy had long been viewed with suspicion, but the scrutiny that Diana's sons, William and Harry, were subjected to reached unprecedented levels of obsession. They weren't just princes, but a family that was tradition and scandal on two legs. Whereas William was the golden heir on course to become king, Harry was dogged from a young age by murkier rumors. It was as a child that he first heard rumors of his illegitimacy. He himself might not have realized what they meant at first, but the constant buzzing from those around him whispered another truth. Innocent photos of the young prince playing in the gardens or walking with his mother, meanwhile, were perverted into evidence by tabloids and gossip-mongers. With his own fiery red hair, so contrasting to Charles's dark looks, Harry's features became a weapon turned on him, as his face became the object of never-ending juxtapositions with a man everyone is well aware of as Diana's former lover, James Hewitt. These innuendos, suggestive as they turned out to be, added nothing but fuel to the speculation wildfire over Harry. So his life was one long fight for the identity that was regularly dismissed. Diana did her best to create pockets of normality in her children's childhoods, with everyday activities, charity work, and love and warmth, but despite all her best efforts, Harry had grown up with doubt hanging over him. She wanted them to have a focus outside the palace walls. But even in such quiet instants, Harry was not unobserved. William was always praised for his level-headedness and similarity to his father, while Harry was more frequently portrayed as the more adventurous, mischievous child, the one who, perhaps more often than not, overstepped the line. These were happy images that, for all their seeming levity, played into the blind item mill. Harry was different in two ways, not just in character but also in blood. Going through school only exacerbated it. Kids are cruel. The rumors about Harry's parentage had become public gossip by then, even among other classmates. Whispering and murmurs were going around, murmuring about these things. 17 MHHHHNNNN. It's hard to even imagine what it would be like to have that kind of speculation looming overhead before even being able to buy a beer legally. Such hard words, whether spoken in jest or in anger, must have made him feel profoundly lonely. He was not just teased like any other boy, he was taunted with suggestions that the man he called his father might not be his real father. This kind of taunting is not just painful, it plants seeds of doubt that grow into deeply rooted insecurities. The media exacerbated the situation. Everything he did that might have been forgiven in any other young man was made part of a conspiracy to which his identity was the key. Whether his behavior had him in the news for wearing obscene clothing, or overindulging, or hot-tempered, one clear message stayed the course. Like all those who don't fit the usual royal bore, it was there in Hewitt, the excuse due shy to handily blame for how Harry felt like a spare part in his own family. This recurring sense of suspicion affected his relationship with his father in a major way. Charles, famously unemotional even toward William, seemed even more cold with Harry, particularly in the public eye. Every posed photograph, every clumsy encounter simply added to the impression that Charles was not a fatherly figure to Harry. Real resistance to bond, or media hype, the effect is the same. There was also public speculation that Harry bore no resemblance to his father, adding to the cruelest part of his early life, an inability to disprove the rumors. Left out there in the cold as a child, Harry had no choice but to rely on an institution that would only ever mediate the truth to him through the prism of bloodline, Lacey wrote. Royal silence was the blanket that protected all such speculation. Where another family might have confronted and rejected gossip, the monarchy's stoic silence that it didn't want to talk about only fueled the rumors. To Harry, being silent must have felt like abandonment. Rather than stand up to the scorn, the very institution that might have saved him turned a blind eye, choosing tradition over truth. Despite all that public hype and her huge efforts to protect Harry, I knew that Diana's attempts to protect the child were not enough, that she could not shield him from her husband's shadow. She, too, was fighting the consequences of her affair with Hewitt, and faced difficulties with her own attempts to protect her son. Her love had freed Harry, but the shadow from her past obscured any possibility of a clear future for him. Every whisper about Hewitt not only tainted Diana, but destabilized Harry's whole identity. When he was just a child, Harry learned a valuable lesson. But at every step he found uncontrolled powers to which he was subordinate, no matter what he did or how he worked to achieve independence. He was shaped as much by the eyes of the public that branded his identity as he was by his heritage and his upbringing. This burden made him defensive, defiant, and set out to make his own way. William, it seemed, was happy to take on the mantle of responsibility, while Harry had always felt unsettled and was looking for a way of proving himself outside of the parameters of royal control and the ceaseless whispers about his character. By the time Harry came of age, the whispers that connected him to James Hewitt were no more faint background noise, they had been refashioned into a bright, splashy public punchline. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, photos of Harry and Hewitt would appear in tabloid newspapers alongside one another, and the seemingly facilitated speculation. This was not idle gossip pushed into the corner but right out front, aimed at increasing circulation, maybe into the millions. Every time Harry and Hewitt were placed side by side it added to the insinuations. As if there was some kind of evidence, it was as if the monarchy had hidden secrets. The media glare was excruciatingly unforgiving. School-age son of a deceased mother from a notorious incident, he was also faced with people who were hinting that he might not even exist. William and Harry were both heartbroken when Diana died in 1997. But the sorrow was deepened in Harry's soul by the one person who would have protected him from the stories being now beyond all protection, the victim of the stories themselves. It was the silence, as the world answered conjecture. He met not sympathy, but, at best, ridicule, being treated far more as a curiosity than a weeping son. Welcome to a battlefield all its own, the schoolyard. Influenced by media stereotypes, classmates quite often parroted jokes or gossip repeated at home were read in newspapers, even, or especially, during interludes of study or camaraderie. Harry had become a somewhat unwitting pawn in a propaganda tug-of-war with Hewitt's shadow looming large. The ridiculing of children was boundless in its cruelty. For a Harry type, their words stung so much because they echoed what the world was already whispering. He had to face the pain of bereavement and of slowly losing his, literally, in a way, social identity. After a while, the suspicions and constant media harassment started to show in his behavior. He became known as the Rogue Royal, slipping away to parties, drinking with abandon, and chafing against the expectations placed on him. The media spun his behavior as more proof of his broken orbit from William, the composed one. The suggestion was not hard to read. William was the embodiment of Charles's legacy and its legitimacy. Harry meant something else: wildness, unpredictability, and, in the least kind interpretations, illegitimacy. Everything Harry did wrong was amplified when he wore an outfit to a party that caused controversy. This was not just a foolish youthful mistake, it was international headline news. The times he snapped at paparazzi or couldn't contain his temper in public were held up as proof he was not cut out for the royal life, part of the media's narratives in their reporting. Even though it was subtly suggested that he might not be Charles's legitimate son, the media never actually said it. At no point during those years did that insinuation hang in the air, unspoken but with a huge impact on his relationship with Charles, more than it did now. As William was being groomed for kingship and loaded with expectations, Harry's relationship with his father was always somewhat aloof and tense. The father and son were photographed together on many occasions, with Charles frequently looking stiff next to the fidgety and uncomfortable Harry. These photos were dissected by pundits who wielded them as evidence that Charles never accepted Harry really was his offspring. Whether or not that was true, the perception stuck and grew a life of its own. This was twinned to the impression that Harry was not as royal secure as previously thought. But at the most challenging of times, Harry sought solace in his relationship with William. The two brothers came together as they mourned the loss of their mother. Even then, the relation was not without ambiguities. To the outside world, William was the rightful heir, the golden one, and Harry was the spare, shunted to the sidelines, the boy destined to live his life in his brother's shadow. Meanwhile, the Hewitt rumor continued to swirl, even prompting speculation that Harry wasn't really in the line of succession. Harry might have relied on William to ensure that he could survive, but there was always a sense that the world looked at them through different prisms, one legitimate, the other not. The presence of the monarchy did little to shield Harry from these wounds. This then allowed the rumors to circulate without rebuttal as the palace ignored them. To a young man, that silence could be particularly lethal, though, because it meant that the one family that required Harry's total allegiance was unable to provide him with even the most rudimentary of protections. Left to fight a battle that would never be his to win, Harry found himself unable to reach the truth locked away behind palace walls. But as he entered adulthood, Harry decided to join the military as a way of showing he could make his mark outside the royal sphere. In the army, he tried to make a name for himself not as a prince but as a soldier who would be judged by his actions rather than his pedigree. Yet, the gossip did not die even at this fresh location. The coverage of his army career made casual references to Hewitt as a reminder that, no matter what he did, he would never be completely free of doubt. His journalistic career would never be unproblematic. The stark truth of Harry's youth was growing up in an atmosphere where his love and legitimacy were repeatedly queried. Although the world expected the prince, it denied him the security of an unquestioned identity. The antithetical elements of this paradox would leave their mark on the man he would become: defensive, voluble, at times impulsive, but also fiercely determined to forge an independent life. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more shocking royal revelations. Stay tuned, the truth is just beginning to unfold.